In June 2025, Chinese scientists published a study in which they did something amazing with monkeys. They took special cells that help bodies heal, called stem cells, and changed them in a lab in Beijing. Then they put these changed cells into old monkeys. The monkeys' brains started acting and looking like they belonged to much younger monkeys, about 6 or 7 years younger. You know what that means, right? It is just that monkeys are practice for the real target, humans. I'm Lumi, and today we are going down another rabbit hole, the one that has been consuming humans for over 5,000 years. The one that has driven emperors to madness, sparked genocides, and created monsters that walk among us today. This isn't about living longer. This is about the twisted psychology that has been eating away at human civilization since they first realized that they were going to die. Now, thanks to what happened in that Beijing lab, we might be closer than ever to unleashing something that could destroy everything we know about being humans. But to understand where we are going, we need to start where it all began. We need to understand why humans became so obsessed with cheating at death. We need to understand when we first realized we were going to die. Picture this. It's somewhere between 50,000 and 150,000 years ago. You are an early human, maybe sitting around fire with your family. Your grandfather hasn't moved for days. His body is cold and stiff. The other animals in your group, they sniff him and walk away. But you're different. Your brain has developed something no other animal has, the ability to imagine the future and remember the past. And suddenly, a thought hits you like lightning. This is going to happen to me. Not just the fear of immediate danger that animals feel, but the crushing realization that no matter what you do, no matter how strong or smart you are, you will one day be that cold, still body. Your consciousness will one day simply stop existing forever. Scientists think that this moment, when the first human truly understood death, might be when our species broke. We have evidence that Neanderthals, our cousins who lived 150,000 years ago, buried their dead with flowers and tools. They knew death was special, different from just disappearing. But here's what's really disturbing. Some anthropologists believe that this realization was so traumatic for early humans that in some ways it drove us to create everything we call civilization. Religion, art, massive monuments, complex societies, all of it might just be elaborate ways to cope with the terror of knowing we're going to die. Think about it. No other animal builds pyramids or writes symphonies or create gods. But humans? The moment we understood death, we started building things to outlast us. Even the word death tells this story. It comes from ancient word meaning to cease or to become senseless, basically to stop. Our ancestors weren't trying to make it sound scary. They were just describing what they saw, people stopping. But somehow, over thousands of years, that simple concept became the most terrifying word in human language. But not every culture sees death as dark and scary. Ancient Egyptians thought it was just moving to a different neighborhood. But modern Western culture, we have turned death into the ultimate horror. Imagine this, you're the first human who realizes that not only you are going to die, but everyone you love will die too. Your children, your friends, everyone who makes life worth living, all gone forever. That is a psychological bomb that's been ticking in human brains for over 100,000 years. And now, in that Beijing laboratory, scientists think that they have found a way to defuse it. The first person we know by name who tried to cheat death was Gilgamesh, a real Sumerian king from around 2700 BCE. But his story isn't a hero's journey. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when the fear of death completely consumes someone with power. Gilgamesh had everything: strength, wealth, absolute power. But when his friend Enkidu died, something inside Gilgamesh snapped. He becomes obsessed with one terrifying thought.
If death can take him, it will take me too.
So what did the most powerful man in the world do? He abandoned his kingdom and went on a desperate quest to find immortality. Imagine this, you are a citizen of Uruk, your king, the man who built your great city, just walked away because he's terrified of dying someday. While he's chasing fairy tales, your city falls apart. Gilgamesh traveled to the ends of the earth, met gods and monsters, and finally found a magical plant that could make him young forever. But on his way home, while he was bathing, a snake stole the plant and ate it. And story says that's why snakes shed their skin and seem to become young again. Gilgamesh returned home empty-handed, broken, and still mortal. But worse, he returned to find his kingdom in ruins. The thing he feared the most, losing everything, had happened not because he died, but because he was terrified of dying, that he destroyed his own life. The story was supposed to be a warning. Obsession with immortality destroys everything you're trying to preserve. But did humanity listen? Of course not. What happens next was even worse. Fast forward to ancient Egypt, around 2600 BCE, and we see what happens when immortality obsession meets unlimited power. The pharaohs didn't just want to live forever. They believed they deserved to. They were told from birth that they were living gods. And if you genuinely believe you're divine, that feels like a cosmic mistake that needs to be fixed. Think about it. You're the most powerful person in the world. Everyone calls you a god, and then you realize that death, the one thing you cannot control, will take it all away. So they built pyramids, massive monuments that required the deaths of thousands of workers. They mummified themselves in processes so elaborate that industries developed around preserving dead flesh. But here is the twisted part. While the pharaohs were obsessing over their afterlife, their people were dying of preventable diseases, famines, and wars. The resources that could have saved actual living people were instead poured into the fantasy of keeping the dead kings comfortable for eternity. This established pattern that we're still seeing today. The people most terrified of death are also the ones most willing to sacrifice others to avoid it. And it was about to get much worse. Jump forward to 220 BCE, and we have Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. The man took immortality obsession to a level that was pure insanity. Qin Shi Huang became convinced that if he could just control everything perfectly, he could somehow control death itself. He standardized currency, writing, even the width of cartwheels across his empire. He built the Great Wall partially as a monument to his own eternal reign. But then came the Mercury. Ancient Chinese alchemists told him that Mercury was the key to immortality. So the emperor started taking mercury pills daily. Mercury, one of the most toxic substances known to humans. His quest for eternal life literally poisoned him to death. But before he died, his paranoia reached insane level. He had scholars buried alive for questioning his immortality projects. He built elaborate decoy palaces because he believed death was actively hunting him. He died alone, paranoid, and probably hallucinating from mercury poisoning. The empire he built to make himself immortal collapsed within 15 years of his death. Some researchers believe that while powerful people were poisoning themselves and building monuments, regular humans came up with a much smarter solution to the death problem. They just decided that death wasn't real. Imagine this, you are terrified of dying, but you can't afford mercury pills or pyramid tombs. So you do something genius. You invent a place where you go after your body dies. Here's how this theory works. Humans invented the afterlife, which basically means life after death. Heaven, paradise, reincarnation, different names for the same idea. I won't really die, I'll just move somewhere else. Think about it. Has anyone ever came back from the dead to tell us there is a heaven? Has anyone provided proof that we get reborn as a different people? Of course not. But billions of people believe it anyway because the alternative, accepting that death means the end, is too scary to think about. Every religion promising life after that is basically selling immortality insurance with no way to check if the policy is real. The con worked so well that people stopped trying to actually solve death and just waited to die so they could collect their eternal reward. But some people weren't satisfied with just believing in immortality. They wanted to make money from it. Around 2000 years ago, Christianity started as something beautiful. A Jewish carpenter named Jesus taught people to stop fearing death and find meaning in helping others. But within a few hundred years, powerful people turned it into something else entirely. Medieval Christians, people living in Europe around 1000 years ago, becomes obsessed with things called relics. These were pieces of dead holy people like their bones or hair that supposedly had magical powers. Imagine this, someone tells you that if you touch that person's finger bone, you might live forever. How much would you pay for that? Church leaders built entire businesses around selling these body parts to scared people who wanted to cheat death. They told people these dead body pieces could grant them eternal life. But it gets worse. Then came the Crusades, which were basically religious wars. If you're a poor farmer living in poverty, church tells you that if you travel thousands of miles to kill people you have never met, you will get a guaranteed ticket to eternal paradise. Hundreds of thousands of people died in wars that were literally marketed as immortality insurance. The message was clear. If you can't achieve immortality while you're alive, you can earn it by dying for the right cause. This wasn't just Christianity. The same pattern happened with many religions. They all started with good ideas about how to live a meaningful life, but powerful people turned them into ways to control scared people who didn't want to die. After centuries of religion selling promises about the afterlife, something changed around 1400 to 1600 CE, a period called the Renaissance. This was when Europeans started focusing on science and learning again after a long dark period. During this time, there were people called alchemists. Think of them as the first chemists, but they were obsessed with finding magical solutions to everyday problems. They spent their time mixing chemicals in laboratories trying to discover secrets that could make them rich and powerful. The biggest secret they wanted to find was called the Philosopher's Stone, a magical substance they believed could do two things: turn cheap metals like lead into gold and grant eternal life to whoever possessed it. Now, these weren't just religious people praying for immortality anymore. These were educated, wealthy men who believed that they could use science to actually solve death. They thought they were smarter than everyone else who came before them. Alchemists like a man named Paracelsus started conducting systematic experiments. But their experiments weren't just mixing chemicals in test tubes. They needed to test whether their potions actually worked on human beings. So they experimented on poor people who needed money for their family. Imagine this, you're a poor person in 16th century Europe, maybe a farmer or a beggar. You have no money, your family is starving and winter is coming. Someone well-dressed approaches you and offers you more money than you have ever seen. All you have to do is drink a small cup of liquid. You don't know how to read, or you don't know how to research what is in it. You don't understand chemistry, so terms like mercury and arsenic means nothing to you. You just know that this liquid might be your family's only chance to survive. You don't know that mercury destroys your brain and nervous system, lead causes organ failure, or arsenic is one of the most deadly poisons known to humans. These alchemists would give different potions to different poor people, then watch what happened. Some people get sick and recovered, others went insane from mercury poisoning, but most just died. The alchemist would carefully write down the results.
Subject died after 3 days of consuming mercury compound. Try different mixture next time.
Hundreds, maybe thousands of people died this way. Also, wealthy, educated men could test their theories about conquering death. What made this different from religious promises was that these men truly believed that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. They thought that with enough experiments, enough dead poor people, enough trial and error, they could actually create a potion that would make them live forever. But that was nothing compared to what Elizabeth Báthory did. Elizabeth Báthory was a Hungarian countess who lived from 1560 to 1614. Now let me explain what that means. In 16th century Europe, society was divided into strict classes. At the top were nobles, people born into wealthy, powerful families who owned vast amount of land and had almost unlimited power over everyone living on their territory. Báthory was one of the most powerful nobles in Hungary. She owned multiple castles, controlled thousands of people's lives, and had enough wealth to do basically whatever she wanted. Now, during this time, there was a widespread belief among wealthy women that blood could preserve youth. The idea was that young, healthy blood contained some kind of life force that could be transferred from one person to another. Some people thought drinking it worked, others believed you had to bathe in it. Báthory became convinced that bathing in the blood of young women would keep her young forever. Now, she didn't just experiment randomly. She systematized murder. She turned killing into an efficient, organized process. Imagine this, you are a peasant girl, maybe 14 or 15 years old, living in a tiny village where your family barely has enough food to survive. One day, well-dressed servants from the local castle arrive in your village. They announce that the Countess Báthory is looking for a young woman to work as servants in her castle. This sounds like a dream come true. Castle servants get regular meals, warm clothes, and protection. Your parents are thrilled. This could be your family's chance to escape poverty. You don't know what you're walking in. You don't know that you're walking into a factory designed to harvest your blood. You don't know that Báthory has turned part of her castle into what we would today call a killing floor. Special rooms designed for draining human blood, tools specifically designed for torture, system for disposing of bodies. When these girls arrived at the castle, Báthory would torture them to death slowly, collecting their blood in large basins. Then she would bathe in it, believing it would make her skin young and beautiful again. The official records say she killed around 80 people. But think about this, those are only the cases that were documented after she was finally caught. Historians now believe the real number was probably in the hundreds, possibly over 1,000. She was only caught when she made one crucial mistake. She started killing daughters of minor nobles, people who had just enough power and connections to make noise when their children disappeared. She is not unique. Throughout history, this pattern repeats over and over again. Powerful people, terrified of dying, deciding that other people's lives are worth less than their own immortality. The method changed, but the psychology stays the same. But while some people are desperately trying to live forever, others actively want to die. Throughout history, entire philosophical movements have been built around the idea that existence itself is suffering, and that death is liberation. Some of the people most obsessed with immortality are also the most suicidal. The same death anxiety that drives someone to seek eternal life can also make the possibility of that eternal life seem absolutely terrifying. If you are to granted immortality tomorrow, day 1 might feel amazing. Year 100, you have seen everyone you love die. Year 1000, you have watched entire civilizations rise and fall. Year 10,000, you have forgotten what it felt like to be human. How long before you would be begging for death? Which brings us to the most important question. If immortality is so terrifying, why are we still chasing it? Because human psychology doesn't change. The same death terror that drove Gilgamesh to abandon his kingdom, that made pharaohs sacrifice thousands for pyramids, that turned Báthory into a monster, that terror is still inside us. The only thing that has changed is our technology. Which brings us to the 20th century, when everything changed. Suddenly we had real science, real medicine, and for the first time in human history, the possibility that immortality might actually be achievable. Because now We have the technology to actually do something about aging. And the people with the money to fund that technology, they are not the wise philosophers who have made peace with mortality. They are the same terrified, powerful people who have been haunting this story for 5,000 years. The Chinese experiment I mentioned at the beginning, that is just the tip of the iceberg. In the next part, we're going to explore how the modern anti-aging industry became a playground for the ultra-wealthy, how entire economies now revolve around the promise of eternal youth, and why some scientists are warning that we might be on the verge of creating a form of immortality that is worse than death itself. But first, let me ask you something. After everything we have just explored, after seeing how the fear of death has driven humans to commit some of the worst atrocities in history, if someone offered you immortality tomorrow, would you take it? And I'll see you next time. Thank you.